Good morning. This is the 25th of May, 2012. I'm Dr. Jack Herlin, a volunteer and docent at the Palm Springs Air Museum in Southern California. Part of our mission is to record and preserve the history of our country's military conflicts, especially World War II. As part of the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., we conduct interviews of veterans and civilians who participated in those conflicts. Today, I'm on location at the Covenant Village of Colorado in Westminster, Colorado. And today I have the honor and privilege of interviewing Lieutenant Colonel Stanley W. Miller. Colonel Miller was a U.S. Army and Air Force pilot in the China-Burma-India theater during World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. He's been an assistant ops officer and is the holder of 3 Distinguished Flying Crosses and 11 Air Medals, flying in B-26s, C-46s, T-6s, and other things. So we're going to be talking to him about these and several other areas of interest. It's a pleasure and certainly a privilege, Colonel, to have you with us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you pronounce and spell your full name, please?
Stanley W. Miller, S-T-A-N-L-E-Y, W, period, M-I-L-L-E-R.
Where were you born, Colonel?
I was born in St. Paul, Minnesota,
And when?
January 9th, 1922.
So you are approximately what age right now?
90.
Congratulations. What town were you born in?
St. Paul, Minnesota.
And was it kind of a neighborhood was that?
Working class neighborhood I lived in.
Residential?
And I grew up residential.
Did your father work?
Yes. He was the assistant cashier of a neighborhood bank, and he ran the insurance department.
Right.
During the Depression, when President Roosevelt closed the banks, his did not reopen. He always said it could have, but it didn't. And then he was in the insurance business the rest of his working life.
What was his name?
Walter K. Miller.
And where did the Millers hail from originally?
Well, from the Alsace-Lorraine area of France and Germany.
And when did they come to this country?
Pre-Civil War, I do not know the exact date.
Mm-hmm. And your mother's name?
Her maiden name was Boardman, her first name was Mildred, and she was born in Stillwater, Minnesota.
And her background? Family background?
Well, her family background, they also had been here many years prior to the Civil War and had lived in various parts of the country. And her father was a salesman who traveled a lot and selling, I think it was timber or something, and I never did meet him. But her mother was with us for quite a few years.
What activities were you doing growing up in the neighborhood in St. Paul?
I guess what most young children do, you play with your neighbors, and you get a little over in high school, you get involved in sports and some of the other activities.
Any favorite playmates back in those early days in
Well, I had
grammar
a
school?
neighbor about the same age, 6 months younger than I was, that we kept in contact, well, until a few years ago, actually.
His name?
His name was Bill Kramer.
And was a school chum of yours as well?
Well, he was a half year behind me in school because of age difference.
What grammar school did you go to?
Mounds Park.
And was that 8th grades?
Yes.
And you participated in any sports?
We didn't have organized sports in grammar schools in those days.
So playground, or was it street?
Playground and street, both.
What kind of games did you enjoy?
We played ball, baseball, softball, played scrub football. Well, it depends how many people we had to play.
Absolutely. And did you go to high school, the local high school then?
Yes, went to Harding High School, which I think is still in business, but in a new building.
How did you get to school?
I walked
Both ways?
both ways, and we didn't need gymnasiums because we got our exercise walking to school.
How far were you away from school?
About just under a mile, I remember.
Under a mile?
Just under a mile.
So you walked a little under 4 miles if you came home for lunch?
We didn't come home for lunch.
You did not?
No.
Okay. What was your favorite subject in high school?
Oh, I'd have to think about that. Probably journalism.
Mm. Your favorite teacher?
The journalism teacher,
Whose name was?
Scanlon.
Scanlon, all right. And did you go out for any sports?
Yes, I played on the football team for 2.5 years as center, and I swam in the winter time. I was on the swimming team.
How was your football career in high school?
Average, I guess. I did not get any challenges from the pros to join them. So. But a 150-pound kid, they don't want anyway.
Is that what you weighed?
Yes,
Dripping wet.
dripping wet.
All right, and what else did you do? Did you do any work outside of school, part-time?
Well, I also have been an active member in the YMCA, and I did assist in some of the neighborhood YMCA groups that they had organized.
You mentioned it just as we started, but I wanted to ask it specifically in that. How did the Depression, the Great Depression, affect your family?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the bank was closed in the 1933 bank holiday, and it didn't open, and so the income that my dad was used to was, of course, deleted because the bank wasn't there anymore. But so I can't say that we never went on welfare, but we were not the most affluent family in the neighborhood.
Did your mother ever work outside the home?
Not until the children got older.
And how many brothers and sisters did you have?
I had 3 brothers.
So there are 4 boys.
Correct.
And where do you stand in line?
I was 3rd.
Number 3. What are your brothers' names?
Robert, Donald, and Glenn.
And the oldest one is?
Robert. I started at the top.
Okay. And Robert?
None of them are alive today.
None. You're the sole survivor, are you?
Yes, I'm an orphan.
What kind of religious upbringing did you have in your home?
Well, my parents were Methodists, so we started in Methodist Sunday school, of course, and went up through in high school and things. But I drifted away after, like most kids do.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when I discovered alcohol, because the Methodists wouldn't allow it.
What was the name of the church at the time? Do you remember?
First Methodist.
Of St. Paul?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And your favorite sport was swimming or football?
Well, I have to think about that a minute. I liked most all sports. The reason I didn't go out for baseball was I didn't have any shoes, and I couldn't afford to buy a pair of baseball shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And they practiced a long ways away, and I had no means of transportation in those days.
Yeah.
But I think I like baseball as good as any.
And what did you do in swimming? What?
Well, I did the longer thing like the 220-yard and things like that, and in water polo I played the goal guard.
So you had all those sports available to you in high school?
Yes.
And was the pool inside?
Yes, we used the YMCA pool.
Oh, I see, yes. Well, that's something else. And did you say you had any outdoor work that you did out of school? during that time?
Well, I could only have activity with the YMCA groups.
And what did you do?
Well, I kind of managed a group of about 8, 9 kids, and we did some sports. It wasn't really an organized league or anything, but we did some sports and some of the other things that the YMCA is involved with.
Was that mostly in the summers?
No, we did it year-round, but there was much more activity in the summer.
Surely. Any other part-time work while you were going to school?
Well, in some 3 summers, I worked at the YMCA camp over on the Minnesota-Wisconsin border on the St. Croix River.
Oh. What was the name of the camp?
I think St. Croix. If I remember correctly.
And the activities you were doing there? Or...
Well, I worked in the kitchen most of the time, and worked in the dining services, to coin a phrase.
Successfully?
Well, they hired me back.
That's pretty good. Now, where did you first get interested in aviation?
Well, I don't know, I think all kids do, and our house in St. Paul had good visibility. There's St. Paul and Mississippi River goes through it, and down in the river flats was the Houma Municipal Airport. And we lived across the river, and up there was a bluff there of about 150, 175 feet, and our house was on one side of the street, the other side there was a park, and then the cliff, and then the airport, so we could watch and see airplane activity frequently. And in those days, when they landed, a lot of times they came low over our area where you'd wave at the pilot, although he probably didn't see you. But so I had an interest in aviation from all that exposure to it.
Was that a fairly large airport?
No.
A small private?
Well, it wasn't private. It was a municipal airport, and corporate people used it even then.
What planes did you see flying over?
Oh, the smaller ones and biplanes and things. And the National Guard had a hangar there, and they had some airplanes. And in those days, I don't remember what airplanes they flew.
What year did you graduate from high school?
1940.
1940. What did you do after that?
Well, Europe was at war, and everybody said we would be going to war. So I said, well, I may as well kill time, so I got a job at Montgomery Ward.
Doing what?
Well, first I was in receiving, and then I ended up in the carpet and linoleum department.
Oh. Are you still, is that part of your expertise?
Well, I can measure for carpet and figure pattern match.
Well, that's a good start, isn't that?
Yeah.
All right. Did you take your first airplane ride? Where?
Oh, at a local airport. It was actually after I'd been approved and signed in for aviation cadets. After the war, we got into the war.
Okay.
And when I was approved there, I said, well, I better see what this is all about.
Okay.
So I paid for a 30-minute ride in a biplane.
All right, I'll get to that then. Because the next thing I wanted to ask you is, what were you doing on December 7th, 1941?
Well, I was home, and I don't remember specifically what I was doing, but I was home, and of course, when the radio was on, and when the news came over the radio, the whole family got together, and look, with 4 boys, my mother was concerned.
Absolutely.
3 of us did end up in the service.
Yeah. What was the mood of the city and the country at that time?
Well, I can't really answer a good answer on that question, because of course even before Pearl Harbor, there were people that wanted us to get more involved in the war than the Lend-Lease programs and things.
So you were not really, it was not really a surprise to you?
No, because we kind of expected it.
Did you have any other German people living around you in St. Paul?
We had some, yes, in our neighborhood.
Were there any bad feelings there?
Well, we had one family that I think was pro-German, but I don't know if there were any really bad feelings.
Certainly. No, I suppose very little Japanese influence.
None. None.
Well, when did you enlist then, or what did you decide to do?
Well, I knew I had to go, and I didn't want to carry a gun in the foxhole in some island in the Pacific, so I volunteered for the aviation cadet program and successfully passed the tests and things.
Who offered that to you?
Well, it was known. I don't know of no specific individual offered it to me. I went and applied for it.
Okay, and so you knew it was available,
Yes.
and it didn't take any college, but
No, in those days you did not need any college.
did you go down with any friends, any particular buddies?
No, my one buddy, well, my friend, my neighborhood friend, he had joined the Marine Reserve and he'd been recalled already. And a fellow that I played football with then, we were close. In fact, I've known him since kindergarten, and we are still friends and still in contact.
What's his name?
John Drost,
Where does he live now?
on Coronado Island in
Oh,
California.
yes.
And he was 6 months older than I am, and so he went in ahead of me into the cadet program and also ended up as a pilot.
With the Air Force,
Yes.
or Air Corps
Air
in that
Corps,
time.
yes.
Yes. Did you have to wait?
Yes, after I passed all the tests, I had to wait about 4 months before I got my call.
And what did that call read? What did it say?
I don't remember.
Did it tell you where to go?
Oh, yes. Well, we went to, in those days, Fort Snelling, I don't know if you ever heard of it, it's
No, sir.
kind of on the junction of the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers, and had been there years and years and years, and even back in the Indian days, Fort Snelling was there. And they were the ones that managed all these programs at that time.
And that was an Army post at that
Yes,
time,
yeah.
and but they had the Air Corps
Well,
As-
the Air Corps was part of the Army.
part of it, yes, yes. And what kind of training did you go through then?
Well, when you are nominated or assigned to active duty, first you went to a classification center where they gave you lots of tests.
How long was the cadet program?
About, let's see, about 7 or 8 months, I forget exactly.
And you were not commissioned at that time?
Not until you graduated.
Not until you graduated. And what kind of practical, not school lessons? I take it you had plenty of school lessons.
Oh yes, we had ground school and pre-flight school.
Yeah, pre-flight.
Even when we started flying, we flew half a day and went to class half a day.
All right, now this is then, it was just shortly before this, that you took your first ride in that biplane,
Mhm.
which you paid for yourself because you
Yes.
wanted to see, what am I getting into?
Yeah, right.
And how did you feel about what you were getting into?
Well, I looked forward to it, and I wanted to end up as a pilot rather than a navigator or a bombardier. And it worked. So I really don't know all my feelings at that time.
Your brothers, had they already been gone, your older brothers?
Well, just my one older brother. He was in the Army, and he went to OCS, became second lieutenant, and then he ended up in Panama. My younger brother joined the Navy. In high school, he only had some months to go, and they gave him their diploma if they joined the military, so he joined the Navy
Yes.
and went that way.
So the second half of that cadet training, then you got your airplane ride or training, first early training, in the two-place, I suspect,
Oh,
trainer.
yes, yes.
Uh,
A PT-19, a Fairchild,
Oh.
low wing, open cockpit airplane.
Was that a big thrill for you?
Well, I had to concentrate. I was very pleased with myself. I know that when the instructor climbed out and said, "You scare me. Go around by yourself," you know. So I think he told them all that. But
That's clever. How many hours did you have before you soloed?
So I think this is a little over 8.
Uh-huh. That's probably about average, is it, or thereabouts?
I think so. I think they allowed 12 hours before they
I see.
washed you out, if I remember correctly.
And then once you soloed, then you continued that training.
Yes.
Navigation, I suspect.
Well, some navigation and no night flying there, no instrument flying. Of course, the airplanes weren't
Yeah.
equipped for that.
Yeah.
And but things like navigation and plotting the winds and seeing if your plots worked or not. You know, direct flight from here to there someplace and things and lots of type of landings, short field landings. And
Were you flying in formations?
we didn't do any formation flying in that category school, no. We did in the flying schools in 3 phases, and you had the primary, the basic, and the
That's
advanced.
right. That's right. And in primary, it was the basics.
Well, primary was your first your first experience
Yes.
at flying.
And then the basics.
The basic was a bigger airplane. A school I went to, we had the BT-13, which was known as the Wwii vibrator, and in there we did get some basic instrument flying, and did some formation flying.
Where was that?
Enid, Oklahoma.
No, okay. It's out in the prairies.
Yeah, well, Enid's still an active air base, so I guess it worked out all right.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, did you have a girlfriend?
Yes, I had a girlfriend. In fact, we got married when I was in Enid, Oklahoma.
Oh,
Basic
and where
flights.
did you, what's this girlfriend's name?
Her maiden name is Barton, Lee Barton, and we're still married after coming up on 69 years.
Beautiful. Where did you meet?
Through a mutual friend in
Yes.
St. Paul, of course.
Go ahead.
Well, that's it.
Where did you first see her? Through a friend?
Oh, gee. It was a group of people that she was with, and this friend of mine, of course, was there also. I don't remember specifics on that.
Would she agree that you met that way as well if she were here?
Oh, yes.
So that's a mutual pact between you two.
Yeah. Well, you only meet one way.
Surely.
How can you change it?
And how did that romance blossom?
Oh, over the time.
When you were in training, she of course was writing your letters, I suspect.
Oh, yeah, we were
or
writing
you were
back and
writing
forth, and then decided that, hey, we had some married cadets, why not? Because I'll probably make it. I made it halfway through. When you get to your halfway check in basic flying school, you figured you'd make very few washouts
Yeah.
after that.
Yeah.
And I did. I was concerned once though, because one of the tests they gave us, we had to compare photographs to a map, aerial photographs to a map, and I aced it. I got 100% right, and I said, "Holy mackerel! They may make a bombardier out of me now." But thank goodness they didn't. I didn't want to do that.
Yeah. That's a good story. And what year did you get married then?
1943.
And where were you married?
I said, Enid, Oklahoma.
In a church.
Oh yeah. We went to the Methodist church, and they married us.
And
One of my Twin City cadets that was with me and been with me from the beginning. He was married, and he and his wife stood up for us.
So, what do you remember? The man, the preacher who tied the knot?
No, I'd have to go look it up on our marriage certificate.
But then you set up housekeeping.
Well, as such, you lived it out of a suitcase. You know, you rented a room someplace, but I had to stay on the base there except for weekends.
And where did she stay then?
Well, she found a place there. All the other wives, and we had in our class probably 12 or 14 wives, and they all helped each other. They helped find these places and things.
So the wives group was very helpful to her.
Oh yes, yes, they assisted.
Did you get time off to see her then? What kind of weekend leave or?
Well, it depended on how good you were. If you had any gigs against you that you had to walk tours, then they would restrict you to the base. And that only happened to me one weekend. But
so you walked one tour.
well, you walked a tour. You walked for an hour on a tour, but you also were restricted. Well, what happened, we got kind of, in advanced flying school, kind of casual, and our barracks especially didn't get up when we were supposed to, and they came in and caught us all in bed. The whole barracks was restricted and had tours to walk.
And so does that mean the whole weekend?
One day.
One day.
You know. And occasionally, yeah, you would have to fly maybe on a Saturday if you'd had bad weather or something and you missed a day, because they had a pretty tight schedule.
Were you mostly flying solo then?
Well, you flew both solo and with the instructor to check you out, you know.
What was one of the hardest things that you had to work on to pass?
Well, I don't know. I remember my instructor used to get upset with me. We had a maneuver. We had to do a rudder exercise stall. In an airplane, when you stall, you lose your flying speed, you know, and the airplane is going to fall into a spin or fall down to one side or the other. And when you're doing these, you go up though and you climb up and do till the plane stalls at a steep angle, and then just by walking the rudders, you're supposed to keep the wings level so it doesn't fall off one way or the other. I used to have trouble doing that. I fell off into spins quite a lot, and I used to, in fact, he used some cuss words and said, let's go up and try it again, Miller. And so I learned how to recover from spins quite well.
It's amazing how difficulties teach you so often in life, isn't it? The things that you do wrong are the best teachers.
Yeah.
Fascinating. How long were you there in that? Was that your advanced training?
No, that was the basic training.
That was basic, okay. And you were there how long in Enid?
Well, let's see, I think we had 2 months at each, 2 months or 2.5 months at each of the 3 phases. I don't remember, it might have been 3 months probably is closer to it.
And where did you go after Enid?
A little place called Frederick, Oklahoma. They had a lot of temporary bases in that part of the world, in Texas and Oklahoma, where the weather was usually flyable.
Day and night now?
Oh yes, one night in basic also, night flying. And I opted for multi-engine, and I don't know, for some reason I wanted to fly medium bombers. That was my goal at that time, and but I never got, well, I got to fly some, but not in combat. And there we had a very light twin-engine Cessna built airplane called the Bobcat. And so then you of course start out with you and the instructor and getting basic procedures and things all done, shutting off one engine and, you know, getting, so.
These were twin engine?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
2 engines, yeah. And then we would pair up with another cadet our solo flying. And so there we did night flying and some instrument flying with hood over, you know, so you couldn't, all you could see was the instruments, and formation flying with, and different types of landings again.
Any kind of harrowing experience at that stage?
In cadets? No, not. No, I never had to walk home.
That's good. And your parents were writing you and giving you support and so forth?
Oh, you know, you stay in contact with them. They weren't writing every day or anything like that. But, and the local newspaper, they had the publicity section at the bases that would take a picture occasionally and send it to your local newspaper. So that happened in basic once for me. And, but that's, it was, you were working pretty hard and studying and things, and you didn't have much time to do anything else.
How many in that particular class?
Oh boy. All I could make is a guess. In our school in Frederick, we probably had maybe 30 cadets.
Okay. Now again, you were not commissioned at that time?
No, not until you graduated.
And graduation took place?
At the base, they had a parade and things. And then they issued us our certificate and a pair of wings.
Bar.
And I guess they did give us the gold bar.
Yeah. And did you have any washouts?
Oh, yeah, we had a few. I think after the middle of basic training, I think we lost 6 people only.
Is that right?
Half of basic and all of advanced. Well, I think the previous people did a good job to eliminate the ones that they didn't think would make it.
Your instructors did they have any combat experience?
I don't think so, but I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have a man here, Gene Robinson, you may know him. He instructed in basic training school all during the war.
I see.
Well, he's moved across the street now, but he instructed in basic all, and that was his job during the war. He never did get over
Is
the
that
sea.
right? Yeah. Were you cadets or young officers? Were you paying close attention to the news broadcasts of both the Pacific and the...
Well, you stayed up with it as much as you could. They posted things. We didn't have any classes on it or anything like that, but they did post, so there was information was available.
Were there any indications or rumors concerning where you might go?
No, not until you graduated.
Did you have any, you had a choice as to whether you wanted multi-engines?
Well, you stated your choice, and they didn't always agree with your choice.
Oh,
so.
I see.
But I did go to the multi-engine.
But that was still at the same base?
Well, you did that earlier during the basic training phase is when you made your decision.
Okay.
Where you wanted to
Surely.
go.
So more than half of it, I suppose, was in what you were choosing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And where did your first duty station then?
Well, my first assignment was to base they had at Pierce, South Dakota, and it was really a base where they collected people and sent them out. It was a kind of a distribution point. Okay. And I ended up from there, only there about 30 days, and sent to Colorado Springs.
Did your wife come with you there?
Oh yes.
And so you found an apartment there?
Yeah. Well, a room and a
Okay.
privilege to fight for the kitchen.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of that during the war. It was tough finding places.
Certainly, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And so then you went to Colorado Springs, and what's there?
Well, at that time, they had a B-24 operational training, a phase training school for B-24 crews. And from there, they progressed to overseas after they graduated there. And I was assigned to a tow target outfit that towed flag targets for them for air-to-air practice gunnery. And in the Martin, what was called the AT-23, it was the training version of the Martin B-26 Marauder,
Right.
which was a good airplane. We had the expanded wing version, the 71. The original ones had only 67-foot wingspan, and they had a very high performance plane, and they lost an awful lot. But when they expanded and they stretched the wing out, it was a much safer airplane, and it still flew very good compared to like a big fighter in some respects. Had a lot of power. And so we tow the targets on a cable out in the back of the airplane, and the standoff position, varying our position and altitude and distance from the plane. And twice we got a hold of the tail of the
I was
airplane.
gonna say, twice.
But it worked all right, and it gave us some additional heavier airplane flying experience.
And you flew it for about how long?
Well, they decided that we weren't paying our way, and they disbanded the unit, and that was about 6 months, I think. And in the meantime, they brought some Wasps in, and they flew a co-pilot with us for a while.
Really?
And if you landed at a strange base, you'd get some funny looks. A mixed
Yes.
front end crew in the plane.
How were those ladies?
Oh, they were all a good bunch of girls. Yeah.
Good pilots.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They knew it because they flew everything. You know, when they did most of their job was ferrying airplanes from point to point, and so they didn't go to school over each and every airplane, but
No.
they flew 4-engine planes and
That's amazing.
twin-engine single planes. You know.
Yeah, that's amazing. All right, then where did you go from Colorado Springs?
Well, then when they disbanded the unit, we had a choice. We
Okay.
could stay there as a co-pilot on a B-24, or go to Syracuse, New York, where they were organizing this combat cargo group. Nobody stayed with the B-24s.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, tell me about the combat cargo
Well,
group.
When they organized it, of course, we didn't know where we were going to end up or anything, and we had a C-47.
Okay.
And so about the time we finished our training in the 47, they decided to give us the C-46s, and they could eliminate one squadron and still get amount of work accomplished, even more because the 46 was so much larger than the 47. And then they moved us to Bowman Field in Louisville, Kentucky. And it was really, we questioned it at the time because the runways were a lot shorter than the ones we had at Syracuse, and we had a much higher performing airplane. But it paid off because overseas we had a lot of short runways that we had to operate.
So they were training you, in effect, for
Only-
what you were,
Only they didn't tell us,
only that, no, of course not. Yeah.
because we didn't know where we were going to go.
Yeah.
And we had some problems. One of the pictures had a C-46 on its nose that overshot the runway, and one of the runway there at Louisville, on Bowman Field. But it was good training.
And that lasted until when?
Well, we didn't stay there too long. Because we completed a lot of the training in Syracuse. And basically, it was to get current and viable in the C-46 aircraft. So
I see.
we were only there, I think, about 6 weeks maximum. If we were there that long.
So,
And then we deployed from there overseas.
all right, and how did you, where did you leave from?
Well, first we had to go to pick up new airplanes up at Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Where they were built?
No, but they had a maintenance depot there that took care of a lot of the problems, upgraded the planes and things, and then you picked the plane up there. And so we went West Palm Beach, Florida, was where we deployed from.
These were in the 46s.
Yeah. And we flew as a unit rather than as individual replacements, which was a nice thing to do because we knew everybody already, you know.
How big in the unit, how many people?
Well, we had 4 squadrons of 25 airplanes.
Is that
each.
right?
And then we carried some of the other personnel in our plane and some of the equipment, and went out. They gave us orders from there to go to Puerto Rico, and I set a flight plan for that, and then they gave us a sealed orders of where we were going to end up, that we couldn't open until we got past the point of no return, so we had to go on. We couldn't come back, knowing where we were going to go. And of course, there was a lot of interest.
Of course.
Everybody's crowding up to the cockpit to see when you open the orders. And so they told us we're going to a place called Sylhet in India. And
What was the name of that name?
Sylhet, S-Y-L-H-E-T.
Okay.
And
Had you ever heard of that
no,
before?
no, I'd heard of India, Calcutta, but I hadn't heard of that. And they gave us, we had the whole package. We had our flight plans and the bases to stop at for refueling and maintenance and things. And then we went down the eastern side of South America to Natal in Brazil, and that was the leap-off point to go overseas. And from there we were cleared to Ascension Island, which was a British rock out in the South Pacific a ways. And in fact it was 1,200 and how many miles was it? Let me check here and make sure I have the proper 1,430 miles. And for all of us, of course, it was our first over-water flight. With no land indication of where you were or anything. You know, you had a time distance heading. Well, you had your radio navigation gear, but that didn't cover the whole distance.
I guess I would ask, did you fly formation over there?
No, we had 15-minute intervals that we took off so we wouldn't all ride at the same time.
I see.
And we didn't have a navigator. We had one navigator for every 3 airplanes that they borrowed from the Air Transport Command. And I don't know, somehow we lost the airplane that had the navigator. I'm still not sure how that happened.
Now, were you piloting this aircraft?
Yes.
Yes, you were.
Yeah, we had a crew of 2, 2 pilots, a flight engineer, and a radio man were our crew. And we logged 8 hours and 35 minutes on that flight, and we had about 9 hours of fuel. So, you know.
And that was to where your destination was where?
Ascension Island. It's South Atlantic, and it's a British place. But the problem was they had a pretty decent radio for your radio compass. I don't know if you're familiar with any aircraft instruments, but the radio compass, you tune in a station, and there are 2 needles on it. One gives you your airplane heading, and the other one points to the station. So you follow that, and of course, plus your programmed heading and things. And but they didn't nearly cross the Atlantic Ocean, to go there. They're good for maybe 75 miles. But so we logged at 8:35 and had that 9 hours of fuel, and we averaged 165 miles an hour on that flight, which was common for that aeroplane. There was one thing that gave us a little head scratching, because occasionally the Germans would surface a sub off the island, maybe 100 miles, 80 miles, and they broadcast on the same frequency, a much stronger signal. And if you followed your radio compass signal, you get lost. And we lost some airplanes that did that, and the time they found their mistake, they didn't know which way to go, because this strong station was still, you were still picking it up. And we did lose some airplanes, but they weren't out there the day that we flew across, so that was good.
That was good.
Yeah. And then from there we went to Accra, and what was then the Gold Coast in Africa. And from there we went across Africa. Khartoum was our last stop in Africa, and the southern edge of Saudi Arabia, in Persia.
Now, what kind of bases were these bases that you would land at?
Oh, they were strictly set up for the transits coming through.
Were they Air Force, Air Corps?
Army in those days.
Army?
Army ran them, yeah.
They ran them.
Most places. I think in Khartoum we had British facility that we stayed at there, but it was just staying one night anyway, unless you had airplane problems. And so they gave you a bed to sleep in, and some meals, and away you went.
Did you have any difficulty with the airplane anywhere?
We didn't have nothing serious, but of course, see, we spent a day in Natal to go over the plane after when we first left, and then another at Accra. They went over the plane again, correct any minor discrepancies and things. No, we didn't. We had one airplane that had to shut down an engine, but it was a little bit later in the flight over. But it was okay. They weren't that heavy. They could fly another 100 miles on one engine, but it took longer. And then we ended up in Karachi, which was then in India, now is in Pakistan, of course.
Oh.
And,
That's right.
and we stayed there a couple days and flew across to this place called Sylhet. And we did stop at Agra on that flight, but they didn't give us time to go see the Taj Mahal. The best I could do was take an aerial picture that the Taj Mahal is about that big. So we made it to Sylhet, and we didn't stay at Sylhet very long because it wasn't a good place for it to get supplies that we had to carry around. And actually our first mission was we went up north and loaded up with barrels of tar and flew them over to a place called Missional in Burma, and where they were building a couple of runways. And the Japs had just moved out of there, and there was still shooting going on around the perimeter.
Now, when you say your first mission, was that look for the aircraft alone, or was there a squadron, or was it a flight?
Well, they had
sortie?
You operated alone, but I think we had half a dozen airplanes on that
Making that
mission. Yeah, but you flew by, you took off and flew. You weren't no formation flying or anything.
I see.
Hi, I'm Stan Miller. Hopefully this short video will provide some history and a visual record relating to some of my World War II activities. Future generations during the World War II time period. Now India is Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. Burma is Myanmar. The shaded areas on this map show the areas of control the Japanese had at the height of World War II. When the 4th Combat Cargo Group was activated, our first airplane was the Douglas C-47. C-47s were used in all theaters of the war, and over 11,000 were built in that time period. But by the time we finished our training in the C-47, we moved to Louisville, Kentucky, and were given the newer and much larger C-46 Curtiss Commando. The best way to describe the difference between the two airplanes is that the C-47 gross takeoff weight was 33,000 pounds. I have flown the C-46 as high as 54,000 pounds gross takeoff weight. When we moved to Louisville, we had shorter runways than in Syracuse and a higher performance airplane. Notice this C-46 overshot the runway and ended up on its nose in the road next to the runway there. Yeah, it was good training though, because in Burma we had shorter fields yet. Many of them were just dirt strips quickly hacked out of the jungle because we were supplying the British 14th Army, which was moving all the time. It was a very mobile force, so we didn't stay one place very long. We also towed gliders during our training, so we would get a feel for the glider crews, what they had to contend with. I even went so far as to be checked out as a qualified glider pilot. When we finished our training, we went to Fort Wayne, Indiana, picked up brand new C-46s, and flew them to West Palm Beach, Florida. We spent a day there clearing up any little malfunctions in the airplanes, then flew down the east coast of South America and across the South Atlantic to Ascension Island, up to Accra in the Gold Coast of Africa. There we were greeted by some very tall natives carrying long spears. That was our welcoming committee. Also, we saw things like camel trains that we'd never seen before. And from Accra, we flew across Central Africa and skirted the southern boundary of the Saudi Arabian Peninsula and ended up in Karachi, India. This camel pulling the wagon was in Karachi. That was quite a common sight there. This lady is carrying camel dung that she collected out on the trails. Might call it camel pies, I guess. They use that to fire up their cook stoves and cook their meals. Then we flew across India. Our first duty station was at Sylhet, but we didn't stay there long because it was not a port and it was hard to get material to move into the war zone. The red arrows on this map show the Japanese penetration of India. They did penetrate up near Imphal, way up in northeast India. And the gray lines here are the routes the British 14th Army took to drive the Japanese out of Burma. That's me in the cockpit. And the British 14th Army had to be supplied completely by air. There were no roads, and of course the port of Rangoon and other ports were been cut off by the Japanese. So all the material they needed was flown in. This little local color here, two Indian men carrying harvested bamboo out of the jungle. Wash day, ladies came down to the stream, beat the clothes on a flat rock, kind of old compared to what we're doing today. They were loading a C-46, and as I mentioned, we carried everything they needed to fight the war. We carried ammunition, we carried guns, we carried bombs, we carried food, we carried 55-gallon drums of gasoline, because all the supplies had to be flown in by air. Unloading a C-46 here. They unloaded them fast. They didn't care much what happened to them. Some of our crew personnel having lunch in a forward area. If we hauled good food, we might take a few cans of it that we could heat on little stoves that we had. And the crews had a lot of leeway on their nose art as long as it wasn't lewd. A couple of our aeroplanes here, where the pilots were quite ingenious. The Burmese are over 80% Buddhist, and there are many, many temples that we noticed flying around Burma. This one was north of Mandalay along the Irrawaddy River during flood season. This is a much larger complex, the temple. Very interesting. We saw many strange things. There's a British soldier standing in the entryway there. In all the temples, they did have Buddhas. Some were quite lavish. Some had gold leaf on them. Some were in quite states of disrepair. Of course, the culture was all new to us young Midwestern Americans. Used oxen to pull carts in the rural areas. Water buffaloes were there also, but they were used more to pull the plows in the rice fields. Then we had to send one of our pilots down to coordinate with the British on our loads. This was one of them with some of the Burmese children in the area that he was working with. The quarters we had at Chittagong, India, which was our second duty station, were these large woven huts. They were really pretty good-sized buildings. We had room in there for our whole squadron. This bridge was bombed by B-25s. Now, this had been earlier, and it cut off the main supply route the Japanese were using to supply their forces in the northern part of Burma. Then we had one very unique mission. We had to haul some guns quickly down to a place in eastern Burma where the Japanese were about to close in on the Chinese forces, and there was no airport. They chopped some trees down and bushes, and we just landed on a kind of a grassy field, kind of like the barnstormers of the early 20s. All of our maintenance was done outdoors, no hangars. I'm not sure I would want a haircut with this barber. I don't notice running water. I don't know any place to heat the water. But they had many of these little stalls in Chittagong. Probably their version of a 7-Eleven store. They sold many, many different items in these small places. This was a street in Chittagong. Chittagong was not as cosmopolitan as Calcutta and Bangalore and some of the larger cities in India. This is Calcutta. This is the main drag in Calcutta, Charingri Boulevard. Notice streetcars and still rickshaws. And the cows, of course, are sacred to the Burmese, so they can do anything they want. This is a taxi driver. He's a Sikh. The Sikh people live up in the foothills of the Himalayas in northern India. And, of course, they drive on the left side because of the British influence in India. Then there was an area of Calcutta called the Burning Ghats where cremations took place. They prepared the body, laid it on these logs, covered it up with wood, and they poured some liquid, I assume something like kerosene on it, and lit it. I'm not sure how that worked, and I'm not sure what they did with the ashes. Many, many things ended up in the Ganges River. And I don't know if that little beggar looking for coins in the can is a boy or a girl, I can't tell. But as the war ended in Burma, and the Japanese were beaten, in a magazine that the British published in Calcutta, had a very good article about our unit. In fact, the underlined part there says that our group hauled more material in a day to the front than trucks could have hauled in a month if there had been roads. Now, that's a relief map showing where Chittagong was, and then we moved up to Mishinau in northern Burma there and started flying the hump full time. We had flown the hump occasionally before that. The main route from northeast India to China came across the Himalayas there, and Kunming was the place you branched out from. Some of our routes, the short one on top was the one to Kunming. We did go way down into southeast China also, carrying personnel and material. Our airport elevation at Missional was only 465 feet above sea level, even though we were way in northern Burma. But just 15 miles east of us, we had 8,500-foot ridge of mountains that kept getting higher as you went east. Where we lived in Missional were these British thermal tents. They had double roofs, so there was some insulation there. And Tonnage Tavern was our recreation tent. Tavern is a misnomer because very seldom did we get any alcohol in Burma. Not that we didn't want it. There's the C-46 over the hump. You can see how rugged the country is there. No place to crash land. And if you bailed out, occasionally a crew took 2 months to get back to their base, walking out before they could get some help. That's me on oxygen up over the hump. Of course, anytime you fly above 10 or 12,000 feet for an extended period, you do need supplemental oxygen. This is a street scene in Kunming, one of the gates to the city. Very picturesque. Pull carts there, rickshaws, a couple of jeeps in the background, though they must have been U.S. And one of the places down in southeast China we went to was a town called Mengzi, and that's a different kind of a temple there, of course, being in China. The hats are those woven reed ones. Now that little boy in the middle, I bartered with him because I could take his picture, because the Chinese thought that a camera would capture their soul, and they weren't all that happy. But the kids on the side, they were relaxed. They didn't know they were in the picture. Of course, we didn't haul anything over the hump for the civilian market, but they certainly didn't have Pampers in those days. That lady has bound feet, an older custom in China that they were getting away from even in that time period. It did make the Chinese ladies more dainty, I guess, if they had small feet. That evidently is a homeless man. I don't know what bridge he sleeps under, but he looks like he needs some help. And that's me on a street in Kunming. Notice there's a rickshaw on the left there, a little fruit stand on the right. We did get time up there while they were loading and unloading us to do some wandering around. Then we had a mission where we hauled Chinese troops from southeast Burma back to South China. And they were just cargo for us. We just walked them onto the airplane, as many as we could hold. No parachutes, no seat belts. Now this C-46 was coming back to Mission, and he ran out of fuel in the traffic pattern on landing. The river was along the side of the airport there. This airplane crashed at the airport at Mission, and I do not know the details on it. But our problems there were lack of adequate weather reports. We never did really know what the winds were, and lack of navigation facilities. A lot of it was dead reckoning flying. This is the Lido Road. Now it was built while the war was going on from northeast India across the plain of Burma, and it connected with the Burma Road here north of Lashio. This is the worst section of the Burma Road. It's the one you see in all the pictures, though. It wasn't all like this with all those switchbacks. Then the war ended in August, and we said, great, let's take our airplanes and go home. But they said, no, not yet. And I didn't get out of there until October. We still flew all through September and the early part of October. Then we went to Karachi again, waited, and finally got a billeting on a ship to take us back to New York. This is going through the Suez Canal. Then we arrived in New York the day before Thanksgiving in 1945, a very welcome sight. Then a couple other little things I'll throw in here to show that flying without feathers is not easy. This is when I was checking out in the Martin B-26 type aircraft, and we had engine malfunction and crash landed north of Colorado Springs. Then in September of 1946, then General Eisenhower came to the State Fair in St. Paul to give a speech, and he was saluted with a flight of 16 of our T-6 training airplane. And coming back over the field of land, one of the T-6s in the element ahead of me ran into one of the other one. We had a mid-air collision. And some of the pieces that were broken off the airplane came back and broke my windshield and knocked the antenna off my airplane. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this. Kind of short, to the point.
All right, we're back again live with Colonel Miller, and Colonel, that was a beautiful DVD, a beautiful video of your experiences, and you took all those.
Yes, well, 2 pictures of the C-46 flying I didn't take, but I took all the rest of them. Yes.
Job well done.
Well, thank you.
Now let's try and get back to where we were, and you had just gotten into the China-Burma theater in India, I guess. And tell us about your first mission, the cargo mission.
Well, of course, we were briefed on the routes and things. There's a ridge between India and Burma that runs about the highest, I think, 8,500 feet that you have to go over to get into Burma. And this was way up in northern Burma, a place called Myitkyina, which is spelled Myitkyina, which, if you can find a better pronunciation, but that's how it's pronounced. And as I mentioned, the Japanese had just been pushed out of there and down. And of course, what happened earlier on, the Japanese, after Singapore fell, they had enough troops, so they moved into Burma in January of 1944. And by May, they had conquered the whole country because there was very little resistance. Which, now this, of course, cut off the Port of Rangoon and the access to the Burma Road, the transportation through Burma. And so all the land supplies were cut off to supply the Flying Tigers and the other troops that were up in western China. And they wanted to keep the troops active in western China to keep, of course, the Japanese from getting more of the terrain of China. And also it tied down the Japanese so they couldn't move the troops to the South Pacific. And so that's when they started flying supplies over what they called the hump, over the Himalayas, because that's the only way you could get supplies to the troops there. And the same thing happened in Burma when the British decided to, let's take Burma back and keep them from coming into India, because the Japanese had made 2 short incursions up in northeast India. And so this really got the British attention. And so they organized what they call a Combat Cargo Task Force, and we were the basis of the task force. The British had some, what they called Dakotas, the C-47 type aircraft. I think there were 3 squadrons of their airplanes that flew with us. And so we were set up to haul all the supplies in that the British Army needed in Burma. And that's what we were doing when we got fully organized. And there weren't any real orientation flights over there. And then, of course, they decided the Sylhet, I'm sure, was as temporary because it was a base that was available. Then we moved to Indian place called Argatella, and we didn't stay there long. And ended up at Chittagong, which is a coastal town southeast around the coast from where Calcutta is. And so this was a good supply source for us to get the supplies we needed to deliver to the troops in Burma. And of course, as the war started, the English troops had to come in from northeast India, and so initially we were supplying them up there, and there were no roads at that time. We were building one, but there were no roads at that time from India into Burma, so all of the supplies had to be delivered by air. And this is the first time in history that you did this for a rapidly advancing army. And so it came in, so all weather, we did day missions, night missions, And a little side there, the Burmese would steal the temporary lights they put on the sides of the runway to market for our night flying. And the red lights, they would melt the glass down and little, make droplets and try to sell them to us for rubies. I didn't buy any of those rubies, but some of our friends did. My friends did.
Basically, were you flying from one place to the other? Were both destinations the same usually?
No, well, our home base, of course, stayed static, but
And which one was that?
well, I'd say most of the time it was Chittagong.
Okay.
We had these other inner bases initially, and I don't know, but Chittagong, India was our main base. And from there we'd hop over, and initially the flights were reasonably short, and we could do three missions a day.
Really?
But as of course, as the war moved south, as the British drove the Japanese further south, they got longer and longer. But they kept us busy. In fact, one time we were so busy, they brought in glider pilots who weren't doing anything to fly co-pilot for us, because most of our co-pilots had been checked out by then.
Yes.
Could fly the left seat in the C-46. But we'd go into fields, short fields, 3,000 feet, that they'd hack out of the jungle, and the initial part of it. And so we took loaded airplanes into places that you wouldn't normally take them. But as the war moved south, there was a big plain in central Burma, where the Mandalay area is, and there they had better runways, they had longer runways and things. And we had, as the war was winding down, we had a mission where we moved Chinese troops from eastern Burma back to South China. And this was an interesting mission. The three of us got involved in this one mission early on, where the Japs were about to overrun these Chinese forces, and they wanted some anti-aircraft guns in there that they would fire laterally into the jungle with white phosphorus shells. And of course, white phosphorus burns when it gets into oxygen, and it was a very effective weapon. But there was no airport, so they chopped down some trees in a plain area, and we landed there with no airport. Only we had, at that time, probably 48,000-pound airplanes we were taking into a place like that.
Oh my goodness.
And so, kind of like the barnstormers in the 20s, but it was very interesting.
The runways or the land, was that just hardened ground?
Oh yeah, it was just, there was some kind of weeds and grass and stuff out.
What was the elevation there? Have any idea?
Oh, I don't remember. And that part, it wasn't up too high. I would guess maybe 1,000 to 1,500 feet.
How long were the trips?
Well, I say they varied. Some were
When they got longer, how long would it take for a round trip?
Well, it would take about 4.5 hours one way, when the longest down to Rangoon, went as far as Rangoon and back.
And the object was for you to leave in the morning, or to leave at one time, to make your trip, and then come back?
Correct.
So, always a round trip.
Yes.
And did you have equipment that you were bringing back and forth?
Well, we hauled wounded back frequently.
Uh-huh.
Not every trip, but frequently we would haul wounded back.
Did they have medical facility or nurses along with them?
No.
Medics? No.
They'd been
Stabilized.
stabilized, on gurneys and things and stretchers. And
Yeah.
they just tie them up, and the airplane was set up so you could do that. And then towards the end, we were hauling back some of the troops that were rotating back to England, and
English troops?
yeah, and they were, well, it was the English 14th Army that did the Burma campaign. And of course, they were a happy bunch, and hard to keep them quiet.
How many of these people could you get in?
Well, in that case, we didn't haul too many because they weren't just cargo. We had seats and seat
Lining the
belts.
sides,
Yeah,
in the
the
back, yeah, I remember
canvas
those.
seats on the side of the airplane. And I think we could haul probably 20, 25 at a time. And when we were moving the Chinese troops, though, they were just cargo. We just walked them into the airplane. And yeah, they wouldn't be quiet. They'd be moving around. Of course, this affects your weight and balance. So we'd go up, on those southern routes, we could have cleared 10, 12,000 feet without a bit of problem.
Really?
On a clear day. But we'd go up to about 17,000, put on our oxygen masks, and they'd all fall asleep in the back end of the airplane. And much easier flying.
It worked.
Yeah, it worked.
How long did those flights keep up for you?
Well, I
Those
think
missions.
we were on that mission, it wasn't too long, maybe a month.
Oh,
And, 'cause the Chinese didn't get that many troops down that far into the Burma area.
how long did your flying those cargo missions?
Well, it varied in Burma, but then occasionally we flew the hump then when we were in Burma, but then when the Burma campaign folded, we moved over to this place called Missional in northern Burma, and that tar we hauled in, we landed on it and on the runway that they built with it.
Is that right?
And there we had about a 3.5 hour one-way trip to the parts of China that we were hauling things into. And most of the trips, we'd have about 30, 55-gallon drums of gas, giving us about a 13,000 pound load. So we'd gross out about 52,000 pounds, which is well within the limits of the airplane.
Now, so you had a pilot, a co-pilot,
And a flight engineer
engineer.
was a mechanic specifically for that airplane, and then the radio man.
and that was the end of, that was all.
That was our crew, yes.
So when you got to your destination, they had ground crews, people
Oh,
to
sure.
do all the
Well,
work
they
and so forth.
hired Chinese to load and unload and refuel the airplanes if you needed refueling. They didn't want you to refuel because they were trying to keep all that gas we had hauled over there. And,
I see.
But, and they would, the trouble was on the hump flying, the weather forecasts were very, very inaccurate, and the wind direction and speed especially, and lots of weather flying, because it's a funny area of the world where different air masses all seem to converge right in that area, and so you get a lot of clouds and a lot of rain and things, and they go up quite high.
Did you have any ground fire at all? Did you run into any of that?
Well, when we were supplying the British Army, you see, when we first started this, the Japanese were still flying fighters out of like Mandalay and places that, as they were pushed down, of course, they had to move their airplanes, but there were some then, and if we got a notice over the radio there are bandits in the area, we would just get really down on the deck, just on the treetops, because if you fly higher, they can spot your shadow going along and know that you're in the area and can look for you from the shadow. So we'd get right down on the treetops then, and by the time we got flying the hump full time, of course the Japanese had been beaten in that area then, so there wasn't a problem. Weather was the problem, right? Lack of navigation facility. And they used to, see, once, they used to also take the gas out of our tanks if they thought we didn't need to get back to our home base. But we never knew what the winds were. Once I landed back there and I had 8 gallons in one wing and 7 gallons of gas left in the other wing, and I could not have gone around the pattern again. Well, it was one of the pictures there of the plane in the river. Well, he was in his landing pattern when he ran out of gas.
Is that right?
And so then after that, we sat on the wing. You know, one of us did with our .45 automatic, prominently displayed. You'll take cut it off, you know. So we didn't have any problem later. Made sure I had enough gas to get home, regardless of the winds.
Absolutely, yeah. My goodness. How long did those missions?
Well, it was about 3.5 hours each way.
Yeah. How long did they go? Were you there 3 months, 4 months, 5 months?
Well, oh gee. Well, it was quite a while because the Burma campaign didn't last that long, and we had flown occasionally during the Burma campaign also. But I know in August, when the war ended, we thought, great, you know, let's go home. But they had, hey, we've still got to haul this stuff for the people in China. And so we still flew our assigned missions. And I had one day that got me over there after dark in China, and we wouldn't take it off to go back till about 10 o'clock, and decided, heck, well, let's stay overnight and go back in the morning, and I don't want to go over that rock pile midnight. But they were pushing us to still fly a lot, and in the morning at breakfast, an Army major came up, and of course I'm a big first lieutenant then, and the Army major came up and wanted to know why we didn't go back last night so we could get turned around faster. I said, well, we need a crew rest, you know. He couldn't fight that. He hated it, but he couldn't fight crew rest. But that was his job, and he wasn't even a pilot to push us.
Yeah, well, what kind of regulations did you have regarding sleep?
Oh, usually when there was nothing set like airline pilots.
Yes.
You know, have
yes.
X number of hours.
I wouldn't think so. Yeah.
We didn't have anything like that, and it depended on the mission. We would turn around very fast, in a matter of 8 or 10 hours sometimes, and do another whole day's work. But that was mainly when the big push was on in Burma, when we flew. The hump started as kind of a casual operation to move what you could over there, but finally when they got organized, and General Tunner was the one who organized it. He later organized the Berlin airlift. So, so then we were, of course, Air Transport Command had the majority of planes flying over the hump, and we were supporting with them there. So we stayed at our own base and things in our own units. We weren't taken in by ATC.
That was probably easier for you.
But, oh yeah, and so he was the one that his people that had it organized, where we had specific altitudes and routes and things. And of course, always the basic rule was you're going east, you go at an odd altitude, and going west, you go at an even altitude. That's even true today with people not on a clearance. And so it worked all right then, and you mainly go to the Kunming area, and from there you could branch out to the various other bases in western China. And so you'd go, and there was a big lake just went south from Kunming, and there was a beacon on the south end of the lake as well as the beacon at Kunming, and the airway would take you into that southern, and then you'd go north, where it was a few 2-3 miles to the base. And then that'd be your holding pattern also. I remember getting over there at 19,000 feet one day, being told to go to 21,000 feet and hold and wait your turn, to let down. And and this happened when the weather was not so good, which was frequent. But then we used to cheat sometimes too, because your holding pattern was back and forth between the two beacons at Kunming and the one on the south end of the lake. And frequently there'd be a pretty big hole in the clouds over the middle of the lake, so we'd get over there and circle down and call in for landing instructions, and some guy up there at 19,000 feet would say, oh, you damn combat cargo guys, why don't you follow the rules? But gee whiz, it saved you 30 minutes of flying.
Yeah, sure. And you got away with it.
Well, nobody ever threw us in jail for doing it anyway.
How about rotations? Were there any rotations allowed with you folks?
Well, we had one guy, but
Excuse me.
he had more combat flying hours because he had flown anti-sub patrol before he got in our unit. And in fact, he was our flight commander, a really neat guy. And so he got relieved early. They took him off active combat flying, and they even sent him down to, there's one picture in there of him down in Burma with some of the Burmese kids, because when he wasn't flying all the time, they wanted somebody to coordinate the activities.
Sure.
And so they assigned him to do that, which he wasn't happy about, but that was all right.
Did you have regular Army chefs, and as far as food, and did you have good food on your home base?
Well, I wouldn't call it good. It was, supplies didn't get into Burma when we moved over there as well as they got into India. And so it varied, but no, I wouldn't call it good food. And a lot of, some places, you take your mess kit, your aluminum mess kit, and go get in there, and they'd have 3 barrels of water, one for your garbage, one with soap in that you dip them in, and one with supposedly clean water that you rinse them off in. That wasn't always so clean if you lived. And so it wasn't in India. They had kind of like big curtains that went down thing with ropes on the ends where they'd hire people to pull the ropes and fans so it wouldn't be quite so hot in there. And then they hired, in India they hired locals to help in the dining room. And of course they had the Muslims, of course, won't eat pork, and the Hindus wouldn't eat beef, so you had to have 2 full crews, depending what was on the menu that day. So there was a lot of little things that you learned.
Yeah. Did you have religious services available? Was there a chaplain?
We had a chaplain. He was a nice guy, and he did run service. And if there's somebody's going up locally, occasionally he'd fly with it. I think he was supposed to see how people reacted when they were in the air. So and we had a doctor.
I was going to say medical facilities as well.
Well, we had a doctor, and we didn't just had a doctor, kind of here where we just have a nurse though here. But if you had anything serious, you had to go back to one of the more established, larger bases.
Flown back.
Oh yeah.
Was there much of that?
No, we stayed pretty well. Diarrhea occasionally, but that was, I think, the main ailment that we experienced over there.
How many missions did you fly there?
We logged hours, not missions.
I see.
And I ended up with about close to 900 combat hours.
My goodness.
And they assessed it by a geographical line. and it would move as the war moved. So that's the way, and the hump flights were considered combat flying.
When did you finally get out of there?
I got out of there in, well, we got, I think it was, let's see, October, something, middle of October, I think. Then we had to go to a depot in Karachi and wait for an assignment to a ship. They wouldn't. We asked them if we could fly our airplanes back, and they said, no, you can't, we don't need them there.
Is that right?
Yeah, well, the airline manufacturers here didn't want a bunch of cargo planes coming in. And so that was partly political.
Yeah.
But, so we had to come back home by ship, and from Karachi, India, through the Suez Canal.
And what ship was that, do you remember?
Oh, the USS Cape Esperance.
And it was a military, naval transport?
Yeah, naval transport, yeah, USTS.
Were you, did you come back as a group, more or less?
Well, no, we had a lot of the same, our own people on the group that made that ship, and it wasn't by the unit, like when we flew over. And people from all there's different areas. We're all in Karachi, and you got the, I think they assigned you by the amount of combat time that you had, something like that.
How were your facilities on board this ship?
Crowded, very crowded. We were, I don't know what kind of war it had been with the berth I was assigned, but I had about, I think there were 1, 2, 4, at least 3, maybe 4 berths high, and about this much room between them.
Was this officer country?
Well, yeah. Oh, yeah, that was officer country, yeah. The enlisted were further down yet in the hold.
How'd you like sailing?
Well, it's okay. And,
Food better?
yeah, the food, well, the food was better. It wasn't that gourmet or anything, but it was better. They had better things.
I meant to ask you, were there any PXs on your, on when you were back in China, Burma?
Well, no.
Any little saloons or that
No.
that were available?
We were supposed to be issued 1 quart of bottle of whiskey and 1 case of beer a month. And in Burma, I mean in India, when we were at Chittagong, we usually got it. But in Burma, somebody somehow or other got siphoned off en route. We didn't get much over there. We had a building, a tent that we called Tonnage Tavern. There's a picture of that thing. But we had a record player in there, and we had 1 record, Sentimental Journey. There were supposed to be records that were going around too. But that was a great record to have, Sentimental Journey.
Yeah, any movies?
Oh yeah, the movies also rotated
They really,
like
yes.
that. They were supposed to stay, I don't know, 2 or 3 nights one place, and they had outdoor projectors and screens.
Just maybe watch them 2 or 3 times?
Yeah, if you wanted to go to the movie, yeah. Of course, depending on your flying schedule too,
Yeah,
because
sure.
you wouldn't necessarily be there at the right time.
So how long did it take you to get back to the States?
I don't remember how long we were on that ship, but I know we landed the day before Thanksgiving in 1945, and when they went over to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey for initial processing and had Thanksgiving dinner there, and they had German prisoners of war working in the kitchen, and they'd give you half a turkey if you didn't tell them to stop.
Is that right?
Yeah, they were. I guess they were told that, hey, these troops have been deprived for a long time, so I'll give them a lot.
You all were pretty healthy. I'm amazed at that.
Well, you mean now or?
No, then. Well, you are now as well, but.
Well, you got exercise because you were walking every place you went, and so and other exercise you checking things out.
What was the name of your commander in the Burma?
Well, we had a Rocky, Roland Red Rocky. He got known as, not to his face, but I forget his first name. But, and he was a lieutenant colonel when we started in the States here in our squadron, and we had a full colonel as a group commander.
I see.
Baird. He'd been an airline pilot that they had shanghaied into the military, and he was a pretty nice guy.
Were they pretty good people?
Yeah, they were. Well, Rocky, we didn't like him too well for some reason, but
Well, where did this ship, how long did it take the ship to get to wherever you were going?
well, we landed in New York from Karachi through the Mediterranean and things, and I really don't remember the exact amount of time. I think it was about 2.5 or 3 weeks.
And how was it, how did you feel then when you finally saw the great lady holding the torch?
Oh, hey, that was a great feeling. In fact, there's a picture of it.
I noticed that, yes.
4 o'clock in the afternoon on a dreary, foggy, smoky kind of day, but it worked. And the Red Cross met us, gave us coffee and donuts.
Did you have any facilities like that over in the China-Burma India Theater, CBI
No,
Theater, Salvation Army, Red Cross, nothing like that?
not, they were all back.
Yeah, sure.
Someplace where it was better.
So you landed in New York, made some telephone calls.
No, in those days you still had to get on a waiting list to make a long distance phone call. Of course, there were a lot of people who wanted to do it, but we were at Camp Gilmer in New Jersey for, I don't know, 3 days maybe, and then we boarded a train and came over to Camp McCoy, Wisconsin.
Oh, yes.
And that's where we out-processed at Camp McCoy.
That's still a
It's
base, and I go back,
It's
remember going by it several times.
yes, I think it's a National Guard base.
Very likely. So you were discharged then, or separated?
Well, I was separated, because I had signed over to the reserves at that time.
Your wife meet you there?
No, she was here in St. Paul. I mean, there in St. Paul. And so well, there was a guy that had a car, and we bummed a ride with him up to St. Paul, and he dropped us off at the railroad station.
For a reunion. And how long had you been gone? How long had you been separated?
Oh, about 18 months, if I remember correctly, through the training and the mission over there.
Did you celebrate when you got home?
Oh, of course. I guess we did.
I hope so. I'm sure you did too. What about your parents? Were they still living?
Oh, yeah, at that time, yes.
They were happy to know your mother was happy.
Oh, yes. They happy to see us and glad that we made it and everything.
And this was what year?
Oh, early 46 then.
Yeah. So what about your brothers who were in?
Well, my younger brother, he didn't get out of the Navy as early as I did. And my next older brother, the one who was in Panama, I don't know, he'd married a girl also from southern Minnesota, so he moved down there. And let's see, but I don't know, well, we got together for some reunions. My kid brother was still in the Navy, and I've got a picture of another group I have of 4 boys, and he's still in the Navy uniform.
Yeah, but then what were you doing between then and we'll say 45 and 50, or 46 and 51?
Well, initially I had to do something to support my family, and I went back to wards and sold carpet and linoleum for a while. And then I got active in the reserves and was flying again out of the Twin Cities in the reserve program. And it became a troop carrier unit, and they gave us C-46s, and of course I had all those hours of the C-46, and so they kind of looked up to me around there, instructor pilot and things.
The old man.
Yeah, yeah.
How old were you then?
Oh, I was 20, what, oh, I was about 20, 25, I guess. And then when the Korean War broke out, of course, they recalled the unit, our reserve unit, so.
The cargo group, the whole group?
Yeah, the whole.
And did that come then from all over the country?
Well, they had selected units that they recalled. They didn't recall every reserve unit that had an active program like ours.
So you still had an active cargo program located in St.
In the Minneapolis,
Yeah.
at the Minneapolis airport, yeah. Because we'd been flying out of there for the years.
And you went en masse?
No, we were split up. That was a bummer too, because Strategic Air Command had top priority on personnel at that time. They were, the bomber, bomber people. And so they sent a team down to interview each of us to see if they could use us. And he had our flying records and our personnel records. There was majors that I was interviewed by. I was a captain at that time. And he, so he looked, and he didn't spend much time. He said, "Boy, you've got a lot of flying hours. I think we can use you." I said, "I never flew a 4-engine airplane. You don't have a twin-engine bomber. But we can use you." Next. So I ended up in Strategic Air Command.
Is that right?
And got sent to Riverside, California, Marchfield there. And they got me out there and they said, "Well, I don't know what the heck you're doing here." I said, "Well, send me to someplace I can be used, like air transport unit or combat cargo unit, troop carrier unit." "No, we've got you here." And they had so many people, they didn't know where to put us all. And I said, "Well, I've got the operations officer specialty code." "Yeah, but we've got 20 people in operations now, and we're only supposed to have 4 or something like that." And so they said, "Would you like to go to the food service?" I said, "No." But anyway, I ended up and they said, "Well, let's see, you've got some retail experience, we'll put you in the basic exchange." So they put me in the BX, but I didn't stay there very long. I went to Japan because of the Korean War. They had so many people they were trying to get rid of. And if they wouldn't do it under my request, they would.
No, of course not.
So then we ended up in Iwakuni, Japan.
You got there by ship?
Yeah, we went by ship over there.
Out of where?
Oh, that was out of, Oakland, I think.
Okay.
And the ship then, that was one of those baby aircraft carriers that they'd made from Kaiser cargo ships. And they were using it to haul airplanes that couldn't fly that far. The fighters and small transports. And so they had the flight deck full of those, and the hangar deck down below was full of those airplanes. And they just, what they did, since they weren't actually flying, they filled in the berths of the flying personnel with passengers. So in some respects, it made a good trip, but I was sharing a place with a ship's officer, one of the ship's officers, but he had a work shift. So he said, "Please don't disturb me when I'm sleeping." And I accommodated him as much as I could.
Sure.
And went over. So we got over to Japan, and
where did you leave your wife? Excuse me.
Well, she stayed in St. Paul then.
Okay.
She went, well, we'd been in Riverside, but then she went back to St. Paul. And, no place, she didn't want to stay there, not really knowing anybody.
Yeah.
And she had to get our son organized for school.
Oh, you had a child.
Oh yeah.
And what's his name and when was he born?
His name's Dennis, and he was born in '44 when I was gone.
Okay.
And so it was new to me to have a
Yes.
son around, a little urchin. But it worked out all right, and they got to come to Japan
Oh, they did.
after about 8 months or
Oh,
something.
yes.
And had to get housing for them.
And where did you live in Japan?
On
Where-
base,
and-
on base in a town called Iwakuni,
Okay.
which is from Hiroshima around the coast and south, I don't know what, 45 or 50 miles in that area.
And you were then assigned to whom?
Well, we were assigned to an outfit called FEMCOM, the Far East Air Materiel Command, and we processed airplanes and troops and things in and out of Korea. And so and we were flying support missions back and
What
forth.
aircraft?
C-47 in those days,
Okay.
and back and forth. So I have Korean time, but I didn't live in Korea. I lived in Japan.
You were going to where in Korea?
All over, different places.
Small.
Well, some are small, but the main base is also Seoul, of course, and Kimpo Airport there, and places.
Once again, the main differences between the 46 and the 47.
Well, I like to describe the difference as the weight that you can carry. The C-47 gross takeoff weight during the war period was 32,000 pounds. I was flown the C-46 at 54,000
Wow,
pound
yeah.
takeoff.
Significant.
Yeah, it's a lot bigger airplane. It had bigger engines, of course, and things.
Handled similarly?
And what?
Did they handle similarly?
Oh, they're both stable airplanes. The C-46 was more difficult in the crosswind because of the mass of the fuselage and the big vertical stabilizer, the big tail on the back. It was trickier in a crosswind.
Any special memorable experiences flying the Korean routes?
Well, that was pretty routine. We didn't get up into the area where there were a lot of the northern Koreans. But so it was kind of like a routine, like people say, well, when'd you fly in the airplane in the Air Force? Well, I flew mostly transports, and it was kind of like part airline pilot, part FedEx pilot. That was much more antiquated equipment for a lot less money, but that's the way I describe.
Were you ferrying any troops on
We hauled.
R&R?
Well, I'm
Back to
not sure
Japan.
what they all were doing, but we did haul, give rights to people.
And how long were you there?
Well, that was a 3-year assignment.
How did your wife fare in Japan?
Oh, quite well. We had, of course, we had base activities, and well, she got involved. They came up with things. She was helping Japanese school kids. They were taking an English course, and she would help orient them with things that we do in America. And she took the Sears catalog with her, so she could show things and they could understand and see the picture of what they were discussing.
Great idea.
But then she got in trouble doing that because there was a strong communist element in Iwakuni, and they didn't want her showing them all those nice things in the Sears catalog, so they made her quit. They had enough power, they made her quit.
So this wasn't on base, this was in
this
town?
This was an off base.
Oh, nice, yeah.
And it was very interesting. That's the one thing about a military assignment for a period of time. You get to know the people and you understand their culture and things, where you take a 2-week tour like a congressman and spend money and not learn anything.
That's very true.
Yeah, I shouldn't be telling this to
Very true.
somebody in the Congress may hear me, but that's all right.
Sure.
I believe it.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Yeah.
so it, you know, and we got to know we had a small base, and we only had, I think, 8 pilots, something like that. It wasn't a big
Oh.
operation. So we did a fair amount of flying, and also they made me, as an additional duty, they made me run the military exchange
Oh.
store, which was, took a lot of time when I wasn't flying, but then I had all the Japanese employees, so I got to know pretty close some of the Japanese people, and when I went over, of course, I said, Japan, I was still fighting World War II, I said, I'm not sure what I want to do, if I want to go here or not, but I found that, gee, they're very industrious, and as far as I was concerned, they were very, very honest. I didn't have to fire anybody for trying to take something away, you know, and things. And so I developed a healthy respect, and I went 180 degrees
Yeah, interesting.
on the Japanese people.
That's great. Did you make any good friendships there, out of the native, out of the Japanese?
Well, yeah, 1 or 2, yes, but, well, one we had the, what do they call them, concessionaires, or civilian people that run businesses that support the exchange, and our watchmaker, his name was Mickey Siki, and he had lived here in the U.S. When they, instead of going to the internment camp, he went back to Japan,
Oh.
and he wanted to come back to America. So and he did, and he set up shop in Los Angeles, and I saw him once there, and I really helped him, and of course, and they're very, very
Gracious.
appreciative of help, because he had to come back on one of the American steamship lines, and they wouldn't take Japanese yen. So he asked me if I would take his yen, and because the troops were always trading dollars. Well, we had script, it wasn't dollar, but for yen when I went off base in downtown and things, because I needed it. So I did, I forget how much money it was, but I took it, and I told the kids that everybody got the word that I had all this yen that I was getting rid of. And then I didn't give the money to him, I mailed it to the steamship company. You see, I couldn't give him dollars, that would have put me in jail.
Yes.
So I just mailed to the steamship company, so they got other ticket.
Good to know,
Then I did get a chance to see him once in L.A., and when they got back, I was on a flight out that way, and stayed overnight, and went in, and boy, he showed me a good time, went down to Japanese town, had a good meal.
Is that right? How nice.
And
What's his name? What?
Mickey Siki, but he's gone now.
Uh-huh.
He's passed on. So, but it was, you learn a lot. And
Yes.
we brought, in fact, our son was, I think, 9 when they went over, and he came back. It was, well, they weren't there the full 3 years. They had to wait for housing, but he was probably 11 when he came back. And we used to have a fight to get who got the news magazine first, because he had developed that interest in what was going on around the world.
Is that
You know,
right?
for a 11, 12-year-old, you don't find them fighting to get a news magazine.
No. Had he been homeschooled?
No. No.
Where did he go to school in Japan?
We had an American school on base.
On base.
Yeah.
So he matriculated up the road while he was there.
Yeah.
Did he learn any Japanese?
Oh, we could get by. You know, you could.
He must have had playmates or
Where's the
friends.
Where's the toilet? You know, Benjo Dodo desk guy. Remember that?
it's very important right after the question, where's the chow hall?
Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. And then where did you go from there?
Oh, I came back to this.
This was after the war.
Oh, yeah. No,
After the
I
Korean
Came, yeah, I
Wars.
came back in C-51, 54, and was assigned to, Topeka, Kansas, yeah. Topeka, they had a SAC base at Topeka.
So you're still on active duty?
Oh, yeah. In the meantime, I had, they had a thing came out, if you're interested in becoming a regular officer rather than a reserve application. I applied and I was accepted, so then I became a regular officer.
At what rank were you?
At that time, I was a captain a long time, and I lost out the years right after World War II because I wasn't active duty, and all the people that had seniority over me. So
of course.
And so I stayed a captain quite a few years before I made major. But and so there I ended up at Forbes in base operations, and I ran we had support airplanes, C-47s again, and I ran that program. And
were you flying at all?
oh yeah, I was flying then. Yeah.
How often?
Oh, not every day, but as required, and I was an instructor pilot, so I worked with the other people a lot, things, and I don't know how many. I just don't remember. You know, I had ground duties also, and running the C-47 program.
Did you have housing, base housing?
No, we lived in Topeka.
Okay.
We bought a place in Topeka.
And
then I went to air defense. Then air defense had needed more people, priority. So since I wasn't in a combat position flying a B-47, they nailed me, and I went to what they call GCI, Ground Control Intercept School, and ended up in Palermo, New Jersey, and in a radar site there, which was a busy radar site. It was a good one. And from there I went to remote Alaska, Kotzebue, Alaska, which is north of Nome, to a radar site there.
did your family go with you there?
No, that was a one-year isolated assignment.
What did you do wrong to get that assignment?
Well, I'd just been back in the States too long. You get back in the States about 6, 7 years, and you're getting kind of warm to go overseas again.
Right, yeah,
someplace.
sure.
And that, well, there were quite a few air defense remote assignments in Alaska, Greenland, you know, other places. So you take the bitter with the sweet.
Surely.
And that was a learning process for me also to
Yes.
be up there where we had midnight sun. And in fact, I got up on I still have pictures of this, up on the roof of the radar site, the longest day of the year, and I took 5 exposures of the sun on the same slide.
Never went down.
So it never went down. And so last one got a little overexposed, but it's hard to figure exposures. I guess. If you're a photographer, you understand that.
Yeah, sure.
And so it was good in some respects. And then from there, I ended up in Albuquerque in the radar center there. We controlled what some of the radar sites in that part of the world did.
Were you flying in Albuquerque as well?
Oh yeah.
You maintained your flying status?
Yeah, I maintained it not all the way through my career, but well, I had you don't fly every assignment either, but a little further on, we got to then they closed out that, so I went to Kansas City to the whole central region for North American Air Defense Command Control Center in there, and I worked in there for a while. And from there we went to Oslo, Norway for 3 years with NATO. I wasn't an Air Force assignment, it was a NATO assignment, you know. And that was a non-flying assignment for me. I didn't fly 3 years in Oslo.
Did you learn Norwegian?
No. Well, we started taking Norwegian lessons just for
Sure.
verbal type stuff, not for writing. But then my mother passed away, and I had to come back to the States, and so I went back, and then our Norwegian neighbors kept saying, "What are you doing that for? We want to learn. We want to practice our English." And they start English, and I think it was mandatory in something like the 6th or 7th grade, so they're up on it.
Yes.
But, you learn enough to get by.
What years were you there, Colonel?
Oh, when did we go to Norway? 64, I think it was, 1964, and that was a 3-year assignment. And I asked for a 1-year extension, but they said, "No, we need you," and I went to Vietnam from there.
Well, Vietnam started for you when?
For me, well,
Yes.
I had to come back and go through, I had to get reoriented, I had to get rechecked out in the C-47.
I was going to say, yeah.
Again, an old airplane, an old man by that time. And
You were at what rank were you then?
lieutenant colonel. And so, well, we had, get into that, but yeah, they had the schools, survival school and reorientation.
Where was all that?
Well, the C-47 was in Louisiana. The survival school was up in Spokane, Washington,
Oh,
that
goodness.
area. And so I went over there and I was the 27th Lieutenant Colonel assigned to the squadron, and the manning document called for 1 Lieutenant Colonel.
Is that right?
Major thing. I mean, they were really scraping the bottom of the barrel, to get all those old people, and a lot. Most of them, they're all World War II types.
Sure.
And a lot of them came out of B-50 or B-52s out of SAC and
Is that
back
right?
into a C-47.
Oh, my
But
goodness.
we had our mission was classified at that time. Of course, the northern people knew what we were doing, but we had 3 positions in the back that monitored the radio broadcasts of the Viet Cong for intelligence purposes. They could tell, casualties and things. And so we take a quadrant and just bore holes, and the people in the back would be listening for the Viet Cong. And occasionally they'd get a weak signal and say, "Well, how about going east a ways or west a ways or something?" So we would accommodate them, but it was again strictly flying, and we stayed high enough so ground fire wouldn't pick us up at about 3,500 feet.
Where were you based?
A place called Nha Trang, which was on the coast up north of where Saigon is, over on the coast. It had been, when the French controlled South Vietnam, it had been kind of a resort area for them. It was along the water. There was a nice parkway went along the water. Some big homes that had been French homes, I guess. So there, of course, I didn't have enough rank to be commander. My data rank wasn't long enough back. But I ended up as assistant ops officer in flight scheduling. I scheduled all the flights. And then they made a flight commander, which I had people under me. Mainly I had to write their effectiveness reports. I didn't have to do much else with them in that particular.
Did you fly at all then?
I logged over 1,000, almost 1,100 hours.
In Vietnam?
In Vietnam,
Yeah.
because I was, as well as doing I had to assign myself missions too, because I was
Sure.
doing that. But also I was still a instructor pilot, so we checked out the newer people. And we didn't have to check them out in the airplane. That had been done, but we had to check them out for the current local
I see, yes,
activities. And also I was a flight test maintenance officer. They come out on major overhauls. You have to take them up and run them through their paces, feather and unfeather and all the engines and all that. And so I stayed busy. In fact, I worked harder than
Did
I
you?
did a lot of my assignments.
Is that right? Any near misses, any?
Well, only once, excuse me, only once did I lose an engine. I had to shut an engine down and all that flying I did well. I might have had one that malfunctioned, but that's when I was doing the test hops right over the base, so it wasn't that important. But we were on a mission one day in the weather and went into there were 3 of our squadrons in Vietnam, and I went into one of the other bases, and I was close to it.
That was a tough war.
Well, that war I couldn't get interested in, so I didn't think we should have been there. Or if we're gonna be there, let's get rid of it. Well, I finished up, I had 152 missions there, but with all my additional flying, I logged almost 1,100 hours. And then I came back, we had in the military what we called the dream sheet. If you're an overseas assignment or thing, you could put in your choice of where you wanted to go when you returned to the States. And of course I put Peterson Field, which is in Colorado Springs. I put Headquarters Air Defense Command, which was there, and Headquarters North American Air Defense Command, which was there. And by golly, they gave me the NORAD assignment, which I really was the one I wanted because it was a 4-year stabilized assignment.
Is that right?
And by then I'd be pretty close to retirement anyway. And so I ended up in Cheyenne Mountain under the North American Air Defense Command operation there. And I ended up as the executive officer for the combat center. And that's when I retired, that's what I was doing.
Fascinating job, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, well, we used to say it wasn't always fun, but it was always interesting. And of course we were direct with the Pentagon, with Washington on so many things, because any of the apparent threats, would come through NORAD, the apparent air threats and things. So
Certainly.
we were the filter on.
Anything that you remember especially during that time?
Well, let's see. Yeah, I thought some odd things happened. Of course, we had NORAD, North Americans, we had Canadians as well as all 3 of our services there. And once an airplane from Cuba snuck in that wave top level into the New Orleans area from Cuba. And of course, air defense, why didn't you get it? Well, the radar sights aren't programmed to go that low. And the radar. And the funniest thing, to investigate it, this was not a actual NORAD operation. It was an air defense command because it was in the continental U.S. So who do they assign to investigate it? A Canadian officer. And I thought that was kind of odd. But no, we ran the combat center there 24 hours a day. We had I'm not sure what's there now. They said they were closing it out and putting it on a standby status on the mountain, but there is something going on up there, but I don't know what it is. But we had this huge display in the front of the world, and we showed a lot of the satellites as well as of course, the air-breathing threat would be airplanes from Russia kind of phased out because we became almost friends with Russia.
Yes, yes, yes. That's right.
Something, it's changing back a little bit again now, I guess.
Yeah.
But so it was interesting, and you were in contact with a lot of people.
And you finally left the military in what year?
1974.
And you lived where then?
In the Colorado Springs. That was
You
my last.
Still have one son?
Yeah.
And what did you do after you got out of the military?
Well, I fooled around for a while. My wife was in the decorating business, and I used to help her. And we got some rental property. I managed rental property and dealt with those kind of people. And some are nice. And played some golf. And you know, it was okay. And we got into motorhoming, did a fair amount of travel.
How nice.
And then my wife, Lee, got tired of the winters in Colorado Springs. I said, well, I won't go to California and I won't go to Phoenix. So anyway, we ended up in Tucson. And we lived there for 23 years and
Really?
before we moved here to Covenant Village.
A nice town.
And there I involved in homeowner association management, all the important offices like treasurer and president and all those things. And I spent, for 21 years, I volunteered at the Pete Air and Space Museum.
Oh, yes.
I was spending 2 days a week there. And
What were you doing?
well, I was a lot of things. I supported the museum quite well, I thought. And I would give tours and explain things to people, welcome people. And I did photography for them. I had some of the museum book, I had pictures in there. And things like that. We'd have special tours also, you know, groups of people, as well as singles. And then when I moved here, I'm basically doing the same thing out at Wings Over the Rockies here. I volunteered at least 1 day a week out there.
That's the Air Museum that's located...
At Old Lowry Air Force Base.
Oh, yes. Yes. And what, you go there once a week?
Always, at least once a week, yeah, depending what's going on out there.
They're very active, are they not?
Yes, in many respects. We have a lot of great school kids programs out there. We don't have a lot of airplanes, but it's a museum designed as the Colorado Air Museum.
Yes.
That way we get the National Guard airplanes.
Yeah.
We have those from over the years on display and other things. And also that we get a little donation from the state every year as long as we keep the category.
I had the pleasure of visiting there one time this last fall, and I'd like to make another attempt to go there, and perhaps someday when you're there, I'd like to
Well,
visit.
I'm there every Wednesday.
That sounds good. We'll have to work on something like that. What brought you to Covenant Village of Colorado?
Well, primarily we decided before we're dragged into a retirement community someplace, we better look around and see where we want to go on. And Lee's sister lives in the Covenant Village in Golden Valley.
Oh,
And so and she's been there about, I think, 17 years now.
Golden Valley is where?
Just west of Minneapolis.
I see.
And and she's been there a long time, and she'll be 97, I think, this year. And so visiting back and forth, we had an idea what the programs were and the facilities were and things. And having lived in, and we couldn't find anything in Tucson. We didn't really want to leave Tucson, but nothing that we felt fit our needs as a retirement place. And they have some there, but we didn't think we wanted to take care or to invest in any of those. So we decided, hey, we know the weather in Colorado. We know we like the mountains. We've always, in summers in Tucson, we frequently come up here in one of our motor homes and spend some time. But so anyway, we decided that since our background we had on Covenant Village, we decided to take a look at it. Figured, well, I think that'll work for us. they're getting kind of nitpicking now, I think. I don't know where our money's going. They don't seem to have any of it anymore.
Is that right?
Well, yeah, they're gonna cut enormous hours now.
Oh, I see.
Instead.
Guess everybody's having problems these days. How long have you been living here then?
Well, we moved in here in December of '07, so it was kind of 5 years, pretty quick now.
And you enjoy it?
Well, I think we made the right move.
Yeah. What do you do for recreation now?
Well, I got the Air Museum, and I don't play. I used to play golf. I don't play golf anymore, but I take some of the trips here so I can take pictures and things.
You got some pretty good restaurants around here.
Well, we're still having trouble finding a Mexican restaurant as good as Tucson.
Oh, I'm sure that's true. I'm sure that's true. Well, we're getting toward the end now, and I'd just like to ask you something that I ask everybody when I interview them, and that is, how would you advise young men and women today who are looking forward to life in our country? What's important to know and do, and what might some of the pitfalls be? Do you?
Well, that to really get the best answer, I'd have to think about it for a week. But first of all, I don't think the schools are teaching as they should, and I think the kids should think more deeply about what the future of our nation and our culture is, because we should be a little more conservative than we're going to. But so many of the educators are people that are very liberal, and more we're expecting government to do everything for us, and that is not what made our country big as it is. And so I think that they should give some thought along those lines, and of course education is very important. And so they should, especially if they want to be successful in whatever they do as an adult, the kids should their parents, I think, are a little lax in this area also, because they mostly grew up in the Lutheran area, and the schools have teachers that are mainly very liberal now, and so they should think about studying more. The foreign schools are doing better than ours are.
Would you recommend a military career? If so, why? And if not, why?
Well, I really don't know. The military is changing also. If you're going to be in the military, a career person, you should try to be an officer. It's a much more enlightening experience, I think, than being an enlisted person, unless you're in the top ranks of the enlisted, and everybody doesn't reach there. And I wouldn't, if you're interested in becoming a pilot, I wouldn't, because the pilots are going to be needed less and less as we develop the drone activity. And you can't plan on being a pilot 20 years from now. At least I don't think you can.
Yeah.
And even the British had an airplane with a computer. It would even land the airplane, and people didn't like it on the commercial airliner though, so they. But so things are changing, and they're changing so rapidly. And personally, I'm way behind on a lot of this technical stuff, like your cell phone.
Absolutely.
Being a telephone is one of the minor things that it does now.
That's exactly right.
And it's difficult to stay up with these things, and but I think the kids should look forward to studying you see, in the future, that things are gonna happen. We're probably in a revolution now, a technical revolution.
Well, Colonel Miller, you can't imagine how much I've enjoyed visiting with you. I want to thank you personally for your service for your country,
Well, thank you.
and also for sharing these times with us. We know it's valuable for you.